Welcome back, focused learners. We're jumping right into another edition of The Explainer today, specifically looking at episode 56, the role of literature in the EFL curriculum. If you've ever found yourself wondering how to move past those standard, kind of dry grammar drills and really truly immerse your students in a target language, well, you're in the right place. We're going to break down the profound impact of using literature in the English as a foreign language classroom, and trust me, it is an absolute game changer.
Okay, let's dive into this. The very first question that usually pops up, and honestly, it's a completely valid one, is simply this. Is literature just way too complex for the EFL classroom? As educators, we have real everyday concerns, right? We worry about low student motivation. We worry about the sheer difficulty of the texts. And we can't help but wonder, is asking a beginner to decode a foreign poem or a novel just asking too much?
But as the source material points out, learning a language isn't just about memorizing a list of structural rules. It's actually a lot more like stepping into an entirely new universe. Languages don't exist in a vacuum. They are deeply, profoundly shaped by their cultural ecosystems, historical events, and even economic systems. So, to really master a foreign language, you have to tap into the specific peculiarities of that community. And literature? Well, literature is basically your spaceship to get them.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. Entering the language universe. 2. Arguments against literary texts. 3. Why literature actually works. 4. Bridging the complexity gap. 5. Selecting the right texts. And finally, 6. The teacher as enabler. Section 1. Entering the language universe. Let's define what it actually means to be a proficient language user today. An ideal language learner is, above all else, a competent communicator. This whole idea is rooted in Canali and Swain's concept of communicative competence, which breaks down into 4 distinct areas. You got grammar competence, those are your morphosyntactic rules. Then there's discourse competence, which is knowing how to use different types of speech depending on the context. You also need strategic competence to adjust what you're saying and bridge any communication gaps. And finally, sociolinguistic competence, which helps us adapt our language to specific social settings. Ultimately, to hit all 4 of these marks, learners absolutely need authentic materials, so they can convey truly meaningful messages.
Section 2. Arguments against literary texts.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is looking impartially at the historical pushback from strict communicative models. Critics made some valid points. They argued that literature relies heavily on unnatural language, distortions in poetry or highly stylized fiction that might just massively confuse an early-stage learner. They also argued that literature has pretty limited practical value for immediate everyday social communication, that it presents a huge complexity barrier for beginners, and therefore it just leads straight to frustration and low student motivation. And we have to admit, those are significant hurdles to consider.
Section 3. Why literature actually works.
So, how do modern educators respond to those criticisms? Well, the sources detail Gillian Lazar's highly regarded framework, which explains how literature acts as this powerful, almost subliminal driver for language acquisition. It's an open gate to cultural access. It practically forces students to develop critical thinking and interpretive abilities. And because literary texts rarely have just one single rigid interpretation, they spark debate, they encourage collaborative learning, and they foster real personal growth as students explore complex human experiences in a totally safe space.
To put that into perspective, Susan Bassnett and Peter Grundy point out the famous British obsession with the weather. Because, let's face it, it rains a lot over there. Notice the incredible word horde this yields. Shine, shimmer, sparkle, glitter, glimmer, gleam, glisten. Literature captures these national obsessions and linguistic nuances perfectly. It shows students exactly what the language is truly capable of achieving, far beyond your standard textbook phrases.
However, we need to clarify a really vital difference here. Teaching literary texts versus teaching literature. Teaching literary texts treats a piece of literature as just one of many authentic materials used strictly to enhance language learning and reading comprehension. Teaching literature, on the other hand, means diving into historical literary movements like Romanticism or Modernism. That approach requires a much higher level of language proficiency and is generally reserved for advanced learners. Section 4. Bridging the complexity gap.
This distinction naturally leads us to how we address the barrier of text difficulty directly. One highly debated method is using graded readers versus original texts. Graded readers simplify syntax and vocabulary, but they try to preserve the essence of the work. Proponents say they help learners get a taste of the literature and serve as a really smooth transition tool. But Language purists argue that this simplification kind of spoils the original charm, and it might even discourage students from reading the real, unedited version later on. Regardless of where you stand, intelligent gradation is absolutely key to managing complexity.
Let's also look at how this builds a more modern, global classroom. There is a vital shift happening right now from the term English literature to literature in English. Since English is a global language, curriculums are actively moving away from ethnocentric labels. Instead, they're embracing contemporary works by non-native or post-colonial writers, like Anglo-Indian literature from authors such as Salman Rushdie or Vikram Seth. This exposes students to the incredibly diverse, vibrant reality of the English language worldwide.
Section 5. Selecting the right texts.
With all these global options out there, how do we actually choose? Well, text selection should never rely solely on the teacher's personal taste. Instead, educators have to balance several objective criteria. We're talking about the practical availability of the text, its truthful representation of a culture, making sure it's free of stereotypes, balancing established canonical works with modern experimental ones, staying within the realities of syllabus constraints, and, perhaps most importantly, carefully matching the conceptual difficulty to the maturity level of the students so we don't completely overwhelm them.
Section 6. The teacher as enabler. So the crucial point is that using literature effectively requires the teacher to carefully balance control with learner freedom. Modern pedagogy heavily favors process-centered reading over just treating the text as a fixed, finished product. The teacher literally has to step down from the authoritative pedestal and become an enabler. You become a facilitator who focuses on learner needs, ensures student autonomy, and creates a safe emotional environment where multiple, differing interpretations are totally welcome.
Let's bring this theory to life with a specific example. Imagine reading a classic like Jane Eyre in your class. Instead of just handing out a worksheet with standard multiple-choice comprehension questions, what if you asked students to rewrite the ending? What if Jane challenged Rochester instead of fleeing? This kind of activity beautifully blends critical reading comprehension with actual creative language production.
It's also super important to respect the individual learning process itself. Teachers must validate learners' emotional responses and deeply value what researchers call silent periods. That means giving students the time they need to collect their thoughts and prepare mentally without pressuring them to speak up before they are genuinely ready to connect with the language. We've journeyed all the way from the theoretical debates of communicative competence right down to highly practical classroom applications. Having reviewed all these key concepts together, I want to leave you with this provocative final question. How will you transform your curriculum to unlock the universe of language for your students? As the explainer shows us, literature isn't a burden to be avoided. It is literally the ultimate tool for achieving true, nuanced communication. Thanks so much for joining me today. Keep focusing on your learning, and I'll catch you next time.